Hi everyone, and welcome to our 6th week of holistic health. So in this week's lecture we are focusing on safety. Let's begin by our acknowledgement of country. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Whadjuk people, and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I respect their cultural beliefs and the spiritual relationship with their country and recognise that these are still important to Whadjuk people today. This again is our beautiful gecko image from Donna Rioli from last week. So our lecture plan, we're looking at food safety review, quick review of it, making sure that you clearly understand the website assignment. We're then looking at how we provide a safe and secure environment for our infants, for our toddlers, what our centre and educator responsibilities are, our safety policies and first aid. So let's get into our assignment first. So your main crux of your assignment is you are required to identify the major care routines and discuss the importance of these routines. You're going to choose 2 routines. And when you look at those 2 routines, you're then going to approach it from the point of view of 3 different age brackets. First of all, birth to 2 years, 3 to 5 years, and 6 to 8 years. So you're going to look at those same routines. So you might look at feeding routines, you might look at sleep routines, you might look at transition in, you might look at movement from inside to outside, you might look at mealtime routines, at sleep routines. You choose any of those 2 routines that you're going to focus on from the point of view of those 3 different age levels. Then what you do is you look at what are the implications for those age brackets for the practices that you have. I want you to think about how you would then form good partnerships with parents and how we have that whole integrated approach to our health issues. So for example, if you chose to focus on transition in routines, so greeting the children in the morning, doing the first health check of the day, communicating with the parents and so on, how would that look? What would you make sure happened and what's the importance of it? As part of what you then do is you must have a minimum of 8 references. So that means for each of those 2 routines, a number of references are required. And you might use one reference for the 0 to 2 year olds, another reference for the 3 to 5 year olds and so on. So at least 4 must be book chapters or journal articles that are not more than 10 years old. So we want to make sure that we have current thinking about these routines and so on. And each of your sections must have reference support for the ideas and the information. And that is due Monday the 13th in the evening. So I will send out an announcement. I'll make up the Turnitin link and we will put it through. Actually, I will work out whether it will be best as a Turnitin link or whether it will be better just as a Blackboard. But there will be a link on Blackboard for you to submit your assignment to. And it will only be the URL that you will need to submit. So you've got to think, what process do you want to use to make it? It might be Canva, it might be in your Wix that you've already created a number of Wix ones. You can just create a new one and so on. But you need to create your website and make sure that is submitted and published on the website by Monday night, the 13th. So those people who come along for Monday tutorial will be able to seek clarification. Tuesday people, you are more than welcome to pop in if you wish to make sure that you are all on track with everything. All right, these are the things that I am looking at. So this is part of your rubric. Demonstrated an understanding of the care routines, making sure that you understand it from birth to 2, 3 to 5, and we should have 6 to 8 in there as well. I'm missing one bit of the table. You've got to provide some referenced explanations, explain how they demonstrate the integrated approach, demonstrate an understanding of working collaboratively with families. You've then got your reading and research, the mechanical and design aspects, and of course your academic literacy. So they're the elements that I will be making sure are being assessed. All right, let's do a quick review. We spoke a lot last week about food safety, The week before we spoke about food safety. Last week was about nutrition and so on. Just to be aware that there are constant things happening where things are being recalled. So make sure that you are well and truly aware of where food is coming from. And remember, we had that concept of the idea of food delivery, food preparation, food storage. All of those things need to be taken into account, as well as the nutrition of the food. So that leads us into other aspects of health and safety. So what we need to be aware of is that we have the potential in a centre that has lots and lots of small children to be really bad at transmitting different diseases and so on. And you know that when you are working in a centre, you are making yourself susceptible to lots of those wonderful things that the children have. So think about getting yourself a flu shot before you head out onto your prac, knowing that if you've already worked in a centre, you more than likely have developed a much better immunity. If you've not spent lots of time around lots and lots of small children, oh, they love to share their diseases with us. So be very, very aware that you need to take care of yourself and how you can do that. In terms of our flu and COVID, a lot of times people compare COVID to a flu. COVID has a lot more potential for disaster with a lot of people, but the flu can also be quite risky as well. So about 60% of those who've died from the flu in the US were in that 24 to 64-year-old age bracket. And it doesn't mean that we are immune because we are relatively healthy. So if you have an unimmunized person who's been exposed to contagious diseases, they should stay away until all potential exposure has been alleviated. So generally, everyone will have policies about which diseases need to be excluded, so on and so forth. So be flu smart. So think about if you need to go and get your flu shot, and there are combined flu and COVID shots now available. So have a chat with your doctor before you head out on prac so that you are going to be as well prepared as you possibly can. So let's think about now our infants and wobblers. I love that idea of wobblers. So the first stage of cognitive development is all about this idea of utilizing your motor abilities and your senses. So we've all seen little babies, they pick everything up, they put it in their mouths because that's where they're exploring it, with their mouths. So an infant that can move is at risk of putting anything that is on the floor or in the cupboards or in the doors or in the electrical outlets and so on, putting anything in their mouths. So everything that is at their eye level, and think about it, if you are a little tiny baby crawling, their eye level is only 20 or 30 centimeters off the floor. And that is not our eye level, and we usually miss lots of things like that. The things they can pull out from underneath couches and tables and all those sorts of things that you hadn't even noticed, and they'll be standing there they'll be sitting there holding it, or it'll be in their mouth, and you're like, how did you get that? So the sensory motor stage in Piaget, it's that birth to 18 months to 2 years, and it's where they're learning through their senses. So they have some degree of object permanence. So they kind of understand that an object exists, whether they can see it or not, but they will continue to look for it once it's out of sight, but they'll forget about it pretty quickly as well. So they are moving beyond that idea of reflex action. They're looking at imitating, they've got some memory, and thoughts are becoming a lot more evident as they're moving through that 18 months to 2 years in particular. Now, we call them wobblers because when they're beginning to walk, they are very unsteady. And that's what you'll find, is that they stay in the baby's room until they're walking, and then we pop them into the toddler's room. And what it means is that we don't want to pop them in too early into the toddler's room because they can get knocked over really quickly. So there's kind of a fine line. Once they start walking, we want to move them up to the next room, because then they become a danger for the babies as well, because they fall on them and so on. So they explore. Toddlers, they do get up to a bit of mischief. They don't understand cause and effect. They don't understand if they pull on the tablecloth that everything on the table will fall on top of them. That if they yank on this, that will happen. So they're learning And so you must make sure they are very, very, very supervised really closely. We don't leave them unattended at all. So when we are caring for infants, they are truly dependent on adults. They are very vulnerable to injury, and we've all seen them with great big clunkers on their heads and great big bruises and all those sorts of things because they don't know what's going on, and we have to monitor as the adults in the rooms and their adults that are taking care of them. We have to monitor everything that is going on. So human babies, they're not like baby animals. They can't stand yet, move around. They can't feed themselves from birth. When you watch a baby animal being born, for example, a horse, within an hour or two, the horse is standing up. The little foal is standing. That's definitely not the case with a baby. It's 9 to 12 months before a baby is beginning to stand up. So they need to be kept safe in terms of their physical well-being and, of course, their social and emotional well-being. So when they're feeling safe, they relax, they enjoy exploring, they grow in their independence, their skills, their knowledge. It's an amazing thing to witness. That builds their self-esteem and their self-worth. But they're also very vulnerable and they have to rely on responsible adults to take care of them. So if we have a look at our second point, infants and toddlers, they are the ones at highest risk for sustaining life-threatening injuries and medical emergencies. My goodness, their interest and curiosity, they just get into things, they're impulsive, they don't understand the cause and effect, so they get themselves into new and unexpected dangers. Anytime a child is near stairs, I have a little panic attack because if they're not used to stairs, they literally just step off them and just head downwards. So be conscious that you are the adult that is taking care of them. So one of the things that we really know is an issue, and it's not a massive proportion, but it's something that we need to be very conscious of, is sudden infant death syndrome. So things that we do to prevent that when we're in a centre is we make sure that babies are always put to sleep on their backs and we have minimal clothing on them, we have minimal things in the cot, all those things we talked about a number of weeks ago. So we provide the right environment to make sure that at our centre there is nothing that is going to cause any problems with that. And as an early years educator, we use protective, meaning that we protect our children from anything that's going on, and preventative measures to reduce the possibility. So we make sure that our cots are in a well-ventilated room, we make sure they're not full of toys, all those sorts of things. I know that when you see and visit other people in their homes, it's a very different environment, but in a centre, we're providing the right environment for them. So some things to be aware of. Infants are not mobile and don't do many things wrong when they're babies. So up until about 6 months of age, the most they'll do is roll. They might roll over and they'll kind of get themselves stuck underneath something every so often and cry at you. However, once they start rolling with confidence and with purpose, the risk increases. So it's not even once they start crawling, but once they start rolling, because you will have some children who just roll. It's really interesting to watch. They will work out just to roll and they will move from different places. So you have infants who are able to creep or to crawl. So they get into more, and it is surprising how fast that they can move. So we need to make sure that we provide the best environment for them that is as low risk as possible. So choking hazards are one of your greatest problems that you will encounter up until the age of about 3 years of age, because remember that children put everything in their mouths. So it means that what we need to be aware of is that anything that is on the floor or on the edges of tables that they could possibly reach up and grab, it needs to be big or soft and squishy and small, that they won't be able to put it in their mouths and potentially choke. So things like if they're little and they're near something like the threading beads and so on, they are potentially a great choking hazard for them. But also things like food. So when we're seated at the table, that's where we should be when we are eating, not just laying on the floor or letting children eat wherever they wish and so on. So always keep in mind that we should have seated when eating, We select food that is not going to be a choking hazard, so we avoid any hard foods like carrots and so on. We make sure they are cooked or chopped up very small or grated. And so we are providing the preventative environment again. Now, if a child is choking, you'll see them cough and splutter, and they may start to turn blue. They'll have a distressed look on their face, obviously. So we tip them head down so that then the coughing will start to dislodge the object, and we slap them firmly on the back between their shoulder blades, and of course we call for medical assistance. Now, we need to make sure that we are very vigilant whenever children are around anything that potentially could be a choking hazard for them. We're preventative by making sure we remove them, but we are then making sure we are very vigilant as well. So when we think about how we care for infants, that babies really have a one-track mind. If they want to get to that toy, it is surprising how fast they can wriggle themselves over to it. So be conscious of things like your phones or iPads that are put down. They're very attracted to all our digital things. Your cups of tea that might be resting on the edge of something. There will be rules in all of your centres about all of these things. Make sure that you understand and know what they are, because they are all there for very valid reasons. Pulling their body up and beginning to walk, goodness, they are becoming the best little explorers, but they just don't understand danger. So we need to provide the environment for them. So when we're thinking about our environments, what we want to make sure is that we've got lots of different surface levels for them to practice gross motor skills, little climbing areas and so on, and we have lots of space. We want to have some open areas so that they can play with balls, they can use some push and pull toys and so on. We want to have some low, secure shelving, because they will see any shelf as a ladder. So they will try and climb it, and you do not want things that will fall on top of them. We've all heard the horrible stories about things falling onto small children. You want to have a book area with our sturdy and soft books, and those ones that they love to chew the edges of. You want to make sure that you've got enough room for individual cribs or baskets in the quiet areas as well. Make sure that your nappy changing area has a sink that you might need to be able to bathe the child, or you know exactly how to get to that if it needs to be somewhere. You make sure that you've got really secure places for all of your supplies in any way, as well as things like your food preparation. So you want to make sure that you are thinking ahead of potential problems, as well as providing the best experiences for them. Now, as they grow and that 18 to 2 years, they move to that pre-operational stage. So what that means is that they start at that 18 months to 2 years, they start to use more language, they start to observe things and have a little bit of logic. It's where they start to have some idea of make-believe play. So what does it mean? Well, according to Piaget, pre-operational children, they think beyond the objects or the people that are immediately standing smack in front of them. So they're starting to realize that there are things they cannot see, touch, or act upon, but they know they're there. And so that's where a child might start to go through some separation anxiety, because they know mum is leaving. They know mum will come back, or that their main caregiver will come back, but it's where they start to fret and so on. So they can imagine those objects or people that are not present. They're looking future, and they can recall some past ones, but they don't use object like older children do. So their reasoning, it's a little bit hampered by some limitations of their age. They rely a lot still on their senses, and they're easily distracted by the appearance of things. So if they see something that they want, they will head for it. They rely lots on their senses, and that means that they're still going to pick up and put things in their mouths all the time. And it means too that because they are very obsessed with whatever it is they want, they're not going to perceive a risk, and they're also going to be quite demanding in lots of ways. So great that we have that movement to more language, but it means that they're going to be very demanding. So what does it mean for us? It means that they're very active and they're very excitable, but it also means that that makes them more vulnerable to injuring themselves. So we want to think about how we set everything up so that we're eliminating risks where possible. We've got the right toys and enough space. We've made sure that we've got ways for them to explore the boundaries and the limits that are available, but we're still providing them with nice, safe worlds. We're using lots of games. We're encouraging things like different role play. We're doing finger rhymes, so Jack and Jill, getting them to stand in partners and roll around and so on. We're getting them to practice having pretend play. We're enabling them to use their language in lots of different ways. We're getting them to talk, we're getting them to sing, and so on. So we're thinking about how we provide the right spaces and the right learning environments. So we want to make sure that we've got a real variety of indoor centres and outdoors. We want to make sure we've got lots of room for our gross motor activities. We want to have some uneven surfaces for practicing climbing up and down. We want to make sure that we've got a room that is available for children who want to go to sleep, and we want to have some space where we can get them together a little bit more as a group. So we might run a mat time and we're having some discussions and things. So we want to make sure that we've got indoor and outdoor as well, so taking them outside, exposing them to some good sunlight, lots of vitamin D, and giving them some risky play if necessary, and so on. So we want to give them all of the right things when we are planning. So when we're caring for our preschoolers, they are natural risk takers. So as they start to grow a little bit more, they're going to attempt actions for which they have absolutely minimal skills. They're going to want to test and they're going to want to master their environments, but they want to make sure that it is friendly and safe so that they can do that. They do not have an adult's understanding of the world around them. They do not understand the consequences of their behaviour. So that is why simple things like an oven will not be sitting anywhere that the children can go up to it, because they will just put their hands on it, even though you've said hot or burny or, no, that will hurt you and so on. They will still go up and test it just to see what it could possibly do. So we need to provide safe environment and we need to supervise. So what do? So we make sure that while they're playing outdoors, we think about what they're going to be doing and how they're going to be doing it. So we want them to play on swings, we want them to play on climbing things, we want them to use slides, but what we know is that that's where they're most likely to be injured. So how do we make sure that we teach them how to use all of that equipment safely? We don't try and hide them from everything. We want to make sure that it becomes part of a teaching and learning process. So we help them to understand how to climb safely. We don't take away the climbing equipment, we teach them how to use it appropriately, but we make sure it's developmentally appropriate as well. We don't have climbing equipment that goes for 3 meters off the ground when they're working with little people. So when we are working with under 3-year-olds, I think it's only 1 meter or so off the ground onto soft fall that we want, and 1 meter is not very high. So it's only up to about your waist and so on. So that would be the maximum that you would have as part of the bridge that they might be able to climb on and so on. So we've got all these opportunities for our early years educators to teach children about safety issues, and that could be things like our proper nutrition. It could be how to take good care of our bodies, our hygiene and so on. We want them to be able to participate in their own well-being. So what is our role? We are responsible for setting up the safe physical environment. We provoke the learning by selecting the right materials and equipment, and we then motivate them to use their senses in some way. We choose the materials and we put them in strategic locations to encourage that idea of exploration and problem solving. So we're guiding that learning by engaging them in lots of conversations and questions. We're making sure that we are talking to them, even though they may be at that real toddle stage or beginning where they might even just be crawling. We're still asking them things. Oh, what are you heading off to do? Oh, aren't you very clever? What have you found? And so you're encouraging that idea of exploration and problem solving. We're planning for different age groups. So when you're working in the baby's room, you're going to have children from 6 weeks all the way through to that kind of 12 to 18 months, depending on the way that your centre runs it. And when you're catering for your toddler room, you're going to have children from that 12 months to 2.5 or 3-year-olds. So you want to make sure that you're providing maximum experiences for them so that all children have nice positive outcomes. So for us, we want to make sure that we are responsible educators. So we are encouraging safe and different types of behaviours. Assuring children's safety requires continuous awareness of children's abilities. So that means our observations are crucial. We understand their stages of development, so we know that when they are very young, they are going to put everything in their mouth. So we make sure that whatever we provide for them is appropriate and it's clean and all those sorts of things. We are constantly scanning for potential hazards and we're putting in place appropriate preventative measures. Therefore, we're providing the best environment. The best environment is always one where it challenges but supports and nurtures as well. So we don't want to make it so sterile that it has nothing for them to want to do, but we want to make sure that we have evaluated it for potential hazards and putting in place the right things to make it work. So let's have a think about our health policies. So every centre will have different health policies and every school will have different health policies. They govern everything that goes on. So health department will send out a little set of documents at the beginning of each year that every school or centre will have, and they're things like how to prevent certain diseases. They will be things about which diseases need to be a straight exclusion, which diseases are a sent home, which diseases are a monitor, if there is an infectious period for which they are not supposed to return back to school or centre, and so on. And so the policies are to make sure that we don't have mixed messages going home to parents. We want to be able to manage any of those confusing or difficult situations to make sure that caregivers are fully aware of when they shouldn't send their child to the centre or the school, and if they have sent them, what the decisions need to be after that, and so on. So we put children's health first because, as I've said in tutorials, children's health can deteriorate very, very rapidly. And a lot of the things that as an adult, if we catch a cold or we get a bit of a tummy bug or a little bit of food poisoning, it tends to go through our bodies relatively quickly and we're often not quite ill from it. We have a bit of sickness, but we recover really well. Little children do not have the same immune system that we have. So it means that sometimes certain children will be very incapacitated by something that wouldn't even touch the edges on an adult. So that's why we have those health policies, because we know that we want to take the best care possible of our children and of every other child. So that's why we have to put in place the right policies. So these policies, they lay that foundation for a climate of wellness for every child to thrive. So when we are creating that idea of a context of safety, our centre responsibilities are: the centre establishes safe facilities. So we make sure that we haven't got, things sticking out of PowerPoints. We make sure there's no sharp edges for children in the toddler's room. We create that nice, safe centre. We hire staff who understand that. We develop the right policies and procedures in our centre to make sure that we have safe facilities and so on. We provide insurance if anything does go wrong. We are constantly monitoring for safety, and we're providing safety training for all staff involved. And that might be CPR training, it might be general first aid, it might be food safety training, it might be risk assessments if you're taking the children outside in any way, and so on. Our educator responsibilities are that we must follow all of the centre safety practices. So we don't go off and do things because we think we know better. There are centre safety practices in place for a reason. When we're designing activities and environments, we make sure they are safe. We are thinking of the developmental level of the children and how we design that. We're going to build strong and caring relationships with the children who are in our care, because that's part of creating that nice, safe environment that encourages exploration and so on. We're going to always model safe behaviour. So we're washing our hands before we sit down to have a meal. We're washing our hands and cleaning things so that they're seeing that we take care of our environment around us. We're picking things up off the floor that could be a tripping hazard. So we're constantly modelling and therefore teaching safety skills to our children. If you provide some new equipment for the children to use outside, you teach them where they need to put their feet or their hands to climb effectively. So you're showing them how to use it the correct way. You are always providing true supervision, not just in the environment, but actually scanning, monitoring what's going on and so on. And then if something happens, you take immediate action and you act and implement what needs to be happening. And you become an advocate for safety. So if something is amiss and somebody else has not picked it up, removed it, and so on, then you become the person who fixes it, goes and talks to the people in charge and says, gosh, this shouldn't happen. Simple things that have been silly that I've had in my classroom, even in my kindies. We had some workmen come in and fix up and do a couple of things, and they left behind a hammer just sitting on the table. So we needed to make sure that we were monitoring the fact that there was a hammer sitting on the table. So we picked up the hammer, put it in a safe space, talked to them about it, and so on. They were very apologetic, but it's up to us in the centre to make sure that we are providing the safe environment. So when we have sick children, we need to be aware that we are going to be exposed to communicable diseases. They are contagious with so many things. Now, sometimes families don't really know that their child is sick, so they will still bring them to school, and sometimes kids get sick during the day, and sometimes children kind of are faking it in the morning because they don't want to come to school, but they're actually really sick. So sometimes you will get children who will be at the centre or at the school not feeling 100%. What we have to do is we have to decide what is the risk to the child, the staff, and the other children in care, and what is the risk to us to take care of the sick child. I think I've spoken with you in tutorials that when I had kindies and pre-primaries and year ones, that sometimes it would be okay to let them have a sleep down the back if it wasn't a major thing. They just had a little bit of a tail end of a cold. They'd had the last 3 days off, and they came back to school, but they were still a little bit sad and a little bit not feeling 100%, so letting them sleep was different. However, if a child arrives and they vomit within the first couple of hours, they need to go home. We can't, because for that one, the rest of the children in the centre or in your kindy or pre-primary could end up sick as well. So you need to make those on-balance judgments about what's going to be appropriate for the child in your care, as well as all the other children and staff that are in your care as well. So what alternative arrangements could you suggest for a parent that you know is a single working parent and they can't come and pick up their child? So think about what is your school going to provide, and you often will have a sick bed and so on at the school, but a centre is a different environment. So check what the policies are in your centres as to what you need to do with sick children. So our implications for our educators. So teachers, we implement the practices to control and manage those communicable diseases. We make sure that we are doing authentic observations, that we are putting in place the right policies and sanitation processes. We're making sure that we are enforcing immunisation. So for most childcares, if you haven't got all of your right immunisations up to date, you don't get enrolment. You're not allowed to send your child there. We're making sure where necessary, we modify the environment depending on the age and abilities of the children. We work with the families to find out what's going on and so on. and we work with the children to make sure they're doing the right things as well. So we want to make sure that we're minimizing any of those common childhood illnesses. And simple hand washing and exclusion, they're things that will get you through most. COVID has reduced its isolation days, so we need to be aware that children may come in with parents who might have COVID and so on. So your centre will have rules about that. So what's our policies? So I want you to think before you go out on prac, what are the different safety policies and procedures for schools and learning centres? So there will be emergencies that you will have to deal with, and you need to realise what you need to do for those. So make sure when you go and visit your centre, they might have a handbook, policy booklet, set of documents. It might be available on the website and so on. Make yourself familiar with those so that you are not caught out with anything. So teachers have to be prepared to handle those emergencies, because parents will expect that you will handle those emergencies efficiently and effectively. So we have had measles occasionally, very occasionally, and that can be quite dangerous for a lot of early years children. So we need to know immediately how we're going to act on that. We provide our safe environments for children, and we make sure that we have worked out what we are going to do and how we're going to organise the environment, the other children, and so on. So some of the things that you might look at, you've got things like medical emergencies, allergic reactions. So if any child in your centre or school has an EpiPen, you need to know how to deal with that. And you should, even as a prac student, have access to information clear about what that allergic reaction looks like and what are the things that cause the allergic reaction. You will have evacuation procedures and processes more than likely popped up somewhere around the centre. Make sure what they are and where you need to assemble the children, where the muster areas are. Natural disasters, if you have severe hailstorms, what's your processes that you have? Fire and smoke emergencies will be somewhere. There will be fire blankets somewhere. There will be a fire extinguisher, at least one somewhere. You will have utilities disruption, so if there is a power or water outage, there will be a policy about what we do for those sorts of things. The next two things where you have upset parents or a potentially violent situation, there will be a process for that. So if you have children who are in a custody dispute, then you will need to be made aware that that is something that potentially could go on, and who you are allowed to send the child home with and who you are not allowed to send the child home with. So disgruntled or potentially drunk, say, parents or guardians who come to pick up the child, what's the policy regarding it, and so on. You will have things which are certainly out of your range of things that you have ever thought of, with bomb threats, hostage, and so on. The one that would potentially be something you could have is a missing child. So there will be a policy on what to do in a missing child. Hazardous materials, sometimes children bring in really interesting things from home that you may not be aware of, but there could also be hazardous materials that you have in your centre, and things we don't think about, like cleaning products. Where are the cleaning products stored? Where are children's medications, individual medications stored? Suspicious articles, if you have mail that comes to the centre, how is that dealt with? All right. So we will be discussing some more things about that in subsequent weeks about safety, and there will be a couple of activities that I will give you in our tutorial activities for this week as well. So one of our final things to think about is first aid. So my suggestion for anyone working in an early years setting is to do their first aid certificate. Sometimes you will have centres that provide this for you. Sometimes schools will have certain people who are allowed and encouraged to do first aid training. Some centres have every person must do first aid training. At a minimum, you know how to treat bleeding, poisoning, convulsions, sprains, fractures, head injuries, and mouth injuries. You want to be able to deal with those quickly and not to do the wrong thing. So know what to do, and where possible, if you can do your first aid training, that is brilliant. So when we move into things like broken bones, they're usually the results of falls, monkey bars, jumping off things, and so on. Children's bones are different to adult bones. Ours are a bit stronger, so they do tend to break them more when they're little. Some children don't. I find risky play is not as risky as it used to be when, for example, I was a little tacker and everybody was wearing casts and scabby knees and all those sorts of things, whereas now I find that far less. But we should be able to recognize when we need to get extra help. Now, the other thing that we need to be able to deal with is asthma. So every school and centre must have an asthma treatment plan, and for any child that has an allergy, there must be an anaphylaxis plan as well. And as I said in the last slide, make sure that you know what the allergy is and how it appears on a child as well. So is it just a small degree of hives, or do they get their throat swelling up and their eyes swelling and so on? And that is scary. So make sure that you know how to do things. So if you need to administer the Ventolin, for example, for their asthma, does it go straight in their mouths, or do you need to have the spacer? What is their plan? Do you have an EpiPen? Is it kept at the centre, at the school? Where is it? You need it to be close to them. Is it insulin, for example, for a child with diabetes? So think about what and how you need to administer things, and do you need to seek further training? Because every one of those ones that I just said, you need to seek further training for. You don't just go and stab a child with an EpiPen unless you know what you're doing and when and why and so on. So check with your centre when you are on prac, because you will at that point always be deferring to one of the educators. But when you are moving into your own environment where you are working, because I know most of you are working in early childhood centres and so on, make sure that you understand what you should be able to do and so on. Just one thing that always pops up when we talk about first aid is, what are our legal aspects of it? So under Australian law, if you are a trained first aider, you are under no obligation to provide first aid to people who are random. However, if you have an obligation under duty of care, so not while you are on prac, but while you are working in a centre, you have duty of care. So you must provide appropriate first aid. You can voluntarily take on, and once it has started, so once you've started, for example, to give CPR, it must continue unless the casualty recovers or someone else comes in. For example, the ambulance arrives. They will then take over. If there is danger to the first aider, so for example, if there was a storm and there was danger of something collapsing on top of you, then you moving out of the way is seen as fine. Or if the casualty refuses, but as a child, they wouldn't be refusing it. So once you start first aid, you must continue to commence it. You can't be legally charged with doing the wrong thing or anything like that unless you had duty of care and you failed to provide the legal first aid that should have been provided to that child. Now, that's the end of today's lecture. Next week, we have Diane Chambers, who runs a lot of the amazing special needs courses. So she will be doing lecture with us, and she will provide lots of information about things that she is very passionate about, not just in children with special needs, but actually making sure that we take adequate care of children in lots of different ways to do with their health and well-being. All right. And particularly looking at infection control and prevention and responding to this idea of illness, accidents, emergencies, and so on. Don't forget, your website is due next Monday. And second thing is, we do not have tutorials this week that are face-to-face, either on the Monday or the Tuesday, because it is public holiday Monday and I'm giving the Tuesday people the morning off as well. I will be sending out to you a activity sheet which will give you all the details of what you need to complete this week. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you back in class either on Monday the 13th or Tuesday the 14th of March.